All right, folks, we continue with the Malzberg panel here. Our friend C. Edmund Wright, you read him at Breitbart.com, an American thinker, and our new friend, Democratic strategist and former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Clinton, David Goodfriend. All right, let's pick up, Edmund, with what Miranda was talking about and the two court decisions. The first one from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, the panel ruling that the Obamacare subsidies were illegal, and then you had the Fourth Circuit weigh in and say, no, they're legal. The popular mindset is this will expedite it to the Supreme Court. What's your take on this?
Yeah, well, I figured this is the Halbig case, and I figured it would go to the Supreme Court. I mean, it's been destined for the Supreme Court for months. You know, the D.C. Court of Appeals 2-1 ruling is what was expected out of that court. The ruling 2 hours later really makes no sense. The D.C. Court of Appeals, Steve, they actually ruled on the law as written. The other court was going to divine some sort of other voodoo explanation of spirit of the law, and now, irony of all sad ironies, they want the IRS to be the final arbiter of this. I can't remember the last time the IRS gave anyone a break on the spirit of the law. Steve, this is a gangster government that is including these three judges. I mean, this is like The Sopranos and House of Cards all rolled into one.
David, to a great extent, Edmund's interpretation of the latter decision upholding the subsidies is accurate because they talk about how, well, if this doesn't, if we don't rule that they're legal, then basically the Affordable Care Act goes bye-bye. You need this as the backbone of the Affordable Care Act. Is that going to withstand Supreme Court scrutiny?
Yeah, I hate to go all lawyer on you guys, but this really comes down to a pretty straightforward issue that comes up over and over again in the courts. And that is when there's some ambiguity in the way a statute is written and it falls to the court to interpret that statute, you have different schools of thought as to what the court is allowed to do to inform its reasoning. Some judges say you have to read that text as literally and as narrowly as possible. Other judges say, well, you have to look at the context in which that text falls, the whole statute, or in some cases, the whole code. How does that term get used throughout the code, and how do we apply that here? So what's interesting to me is that I don't know where the current Supreme Court goes in a statutory interpretation issue like this, because quite frankly, this has been a very, very activist Supreme Court, taking out huge swaths of, let's say, campaign finance law, for example, when a conservative court, I would think, would take a narrower approach. So that having been said, if this does go to the Supreme Court, and I think it will, you're going to have a battle between different views of how you get to interpret a statute. Do you look at it literally and don't pay any attention to what's around it? Or do you look at the language at issue in the context of the whole statute? I think what I'm getting
David, I'm out of time, but I appreciate you being here. David Goodfriend and, of course, C. Edmund Wright. We'll speak to you both again, and we'll be back with Hank Scheinkampf and more. You're welcome. But first, this hour's American Moment takes a look back at President Nixon's visit to China.
His presidency was one of the most vexing in American history. Mention the name Richard Milhous Nixon, and some will always remember him as the president who resigned over Watergate. But many others will credit him with one of the greatest diplomatic achievements, the reestablishment of relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China.
As I have pointed out on a number of occasions over the past 3 years, there can be no stable and enduring peace without the participation of the People's Republic of China and its 750 million people.
For 25 years, diplomatic relations between the two great nations had chilled, following the United States' decision to recognize Taiwan as the legitimate government of China. President Nixon and his then National Security Advisor, Dr. Henry Kissinger, reached out to his communist adversary to change that.
The meeting between the leaders of China and the United States is to seek the normalization of relations between the two countries, and also to exchange views on questions of concern to the two sides.
On February 21st, 1972, President Nixon, along with his wife Pat, arrived in Beijing. He was feted by the Chinese and honored by no less a figure than Chairman Mao himself. Richard Nixon's opening of China to the West has been described as genius, the boldest diplomatic move on the global chessboard in a century. In one stroke, Nixon had separated communist China from the Soviet Union, reducing the power of the communist bloc and paving the way for the eventual end of the Cold War. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.